when you get into a fourth or fifth pregnancy and you really don't have resources, I think it's pretty hard. So women would lie awake at night or not feel like eating or have a lot of morning sickness and those kinds of things. And I think that smoking cannabis and drinking cannabis relieved some of that anxiety, depression, not associated with the pregnancy per se, but just all the responsibilities that they had in life. And even those women who were in permanent unions with men, these were men who, many of them lovely men, but economically somewhat marginal. It was a struggle for these women to support their children. So I thought, any little comfort that they can get out of having an occasional marijuana cigarette was probably a good thing. I think it was, I had heard about the effects in relieving nausea in general, but the effectiveness of this was really quite amazing. Women experiencing nausea in the first trimester, particularly, and the use of cannabis. So that was pretty interesting for me. We did discover that actually the women whose offspring, and this was in the later study, the women whose children actually were the best performers on, well, what would be equivalent of an IQ test and some of the other behavioral scales, were only children. So independent of whether you smoked marijuana or not, if you only had one child, and in this pretty stressful environment, you could give that child what he or she needed to have to be a high performer in school. Once you started having lots of children, whether you used cannabis or not, it was pretty hard.
Yes, I can imagine. No, I can't imagine there, but I can imagine that the same could be said here in the States, but on a much different level. Once you start having multiple children and you're working and, we have all the things that go along with our daily lives.
That's right.
Yeah, it's only natural that the amount of time that you're able to dedicate is lessened. So I can understand that. Now, we've made it up to the 1 month. Tell us about the 3-month check and up until the 5-year-old state, or did you go back at 5 when they were 5?
We didn't follow them at 3 months. We had 1 day, 3 days, and 1 month. Then we went right to the, we were funded by NIH to do a 5-year study. So we had sort of followed these children. We didn't let go of them. We had other projects, various projects, and graduate students who went down and did some interesting little studies. And so we knew all these families and continued. They were like 60 new friends,
Yes.
And 60 godchildren. And, so when the children, right before they became 5, we actually followed them for a year before they became 5. So we followed them from 4 to 5, and we did we evaluated the children, and some of the children were just starting school then. And we were able to take a look at some of their school performance, but we had 2 measures. We had a behavioral exam and we had a cognitive exam. And we tested all of our children, and we actually could find, once they got to that age, any differences that they had with regard to prenatal exposure just disappeared. It all became a matter of context and environment, and which families were able to provide a better nurturing and nourishing environment for their children were the ones that were succeeded. So we just couldn't find any evidence that prenatal exposure had any lasting effect or that would supersede either for better or for worse the environment, the context in which a child was growing up.
I see. Wow, what an amazing study. And then were you able to go back when they were adults and catch up with some of them?
No, we've never been funded for that. I haven't sought any funding, but we have gone back and we've located. I'm sure we could locate most of them, but we've located about 25 of them, and it's fascinating. I mean, some of the children from our heaviest smokers have gone on to go to get scholarships at very good places in Jamaica for high school, and then gone on to become, accountants or nurses or all kinds of things. And then some of the children of those very heavy smokers haven't done very well at all. I mean, they're okay, but they're existing, but they haven't gone on to get more education. So again, we couldn't really find any, even in our little sample of 25, and this is very, very preliminary, couldn't find anything that would say, gosh, these kids who were exposed to cannabis when they were prenatally were compromised in any way,
right.
Nor were they particularly advantaged.
Sure, I understand that.
Yeah,
but it is nice, and I think it's very indicative of what cannabis is and does for our bodies. That the fact that you didn't see a lot of the, I guess, newborn addictive behavior, Down syndrome, things like that, things associated with mothers who have drank heavily during their pregnancy or have done other drugs, during their pregnancy. None of that was present, was it?
Well, not at all. I think when people ask me, do I think marijuana should be legalized? I mean, I think it should be reframed as one of those substances that has many uses in society, including medicinal use. And I think it should be decriminalized. I just can't imagine that, when you have women who are knowing the absolutely identifiable effects of cigarette use or alcohol use during pregnancy, that we would choose to arrest only the women who are using only cannabis. I mean, this makes no sense to me at all. And, it's probably one of those slippery slopes, but I just find it, it's another example of society controlling women and who are really trying to do the very best thing they can for their children and for their own health during pregnancy. I don't know. I just find, every culture has its substances that it disapproves of, or it disapproves or approves. But here we are with physicians who actually prescribed thalidomide for pregnant women. Prescribed it, without really knowing the consequences of it. We know the consequences of cigarettes and alcohol. No one gets arrested for it. But we also know that there appears to be no really compromising effect of marijuana, and yet we go and arrest women for using marijuana during pregnancy or breastfeeding. I think something's wrong there.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, Melanie, tell us a little bit about your journey leading you up to co-founding Patients Out of Time. That's such a spectacular organization. I'd like our listeners to have a little background on the organization, your involvement in it, and of course your co-founder.
Oh, well, thank you for attributing to me that notion that I'm a co-founder, because although I have been a board member and supporter of Patients Out of Time, I have to really, that is the invention of Mary Lynn Mathry and her husband, Al Byrne, who have been absolutely stalwart proponents of medical cannabis use. And Mary Lynn is a nurse. She's a psychiatric nurse, very qualified, and I think she and her husband, Al, met when they were both in the service. And this has been their life's work. And I feel that they came to me when I was at the University of Iowa and said we would like to have our first clinical conference on medical marijuana use. And I was a little flummoxed, I think, because I thought, oh my gosh, but in Iowa, where, for being a rather conservative place, and of course it's good to have tenure in a place. So I said, well, okay, we'll try it. And that was the very first of many, many successful clinical conferences that Patients Out of Time has